clutching the file in his hands. "We still don't have all the pieces of the puzzle, but Matthew, we're closer to the truth than ever before, and somehow your dog seemed to know it before any of us." Matthew took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the lawyer, then he let go the rest of the way. He said with a determination he thought he'd lost long ago as the cell door closed again. He knew the next move could change everything. The sun was starting to rise, but Matthew had barely slept. The tension of knowing his freedom depended on an unsolved mystery keeping him awake. He replayed every moment before his arrest in his head, looking for any detail that could explain how that piece of paper. Every time, when he closed his eyes, Titan appeared. The deep and devoted eyes of a German shepherd seemed to hold a secret. There was something about Titan's behavior that he couldn't understand. Especially the insistence on his defense during the trial made Matthew feel uneasy. Meanwhile, in the lawyer's office, the document was being carefully analyzed. There was one name that stood out in particular, a powerful businessman with political connections, someone who at first glance did not seem to have a direct connection to Matthew. This discovery was alarming. Why would this man get involved in something like this? The lawyer decided to investigate further but knew he was treading on dangerous ground. The evidence pointed to a conspiracy greater than they could imagine, something that involved much more than just the crime Matthew had been convicted of in prison. A guard brought a message for Matthew. The visit was scheduled for noon. No name was given, which was already strange. The anxiety was growing, as unexpected visits rarely meant good news. When he entered the visiting room, Matthew found a woman sitting by the other side of the glass. She was well dressed and had a cold, calculating look. But there was something in her eyes that betrayed her tension. "You don't know me," she began, "but I know who you are, and more importantly, I know who put you here." Matthew was silent, watching the woman's every move. She seemed to hesitate but continued, "The man whose name is on this document has more secrets than you can imagine, and you were just a pawn in his game. What he did to you was personal." Matthew leaned forward, clenching his fists. "Personal? I don't even know him. Why would he do this to me?" The woman turned away as if carefully considering what she was going to say. "Because he needed someone to blame and you were the perfect target. You're not as unknown as you think." Her words opened a wound Matthew didn't even know existed. He tried to understand what she meant, but the woman didn't give any details before she left. She left a note with the lawyer. "He'll know what to do with it," she said without looking back. The visit, though brief, had thrown Matthew into a whirlwind of doubt and fear. Who was this woman? How did she know so much, and most of all, what did it mean that he wasn't as unknown as he thought? The questions echoed through his mind like a storm as he walked back to his cell. Matthew put his head in his hands. He felt like he was on the verge of discovering something that would change everything, but he still couldn't put the puzzle together. Deep down he knew time was against him, but there was an unshakable certainty that the key to all this was still Titan. Something about this dog, something he was trying to show, was the missing piece, and Matthew knew that if he wanted to get out of this alive he had to find out what it was before it was too late. Matthew lay on the narrow bed for hours. The woman's words echoed in his head. "You're not as unknown as you think." Something inside him told him that this was related to Titan. He remembered the day he first saw the dog at the shelter, injured and deeply scarred, but with a determined look that instantly captivated him. Titans had passed until then. The mystery seemed to unravel slowly and anxiety grew inside him. The next day the lawyer brought an envelope with an address and a phrase to ask about the fire. Matthew froze when he recognized the address. It was the shelter where he had adopted Titan. The memory of that place surfaced, causing a mixture of sadness and curiosity. Something in the shelter's past and Titan's past seemed directly related to his situation. Matthew's instincts, they told him that he needed answers that his lawyer was supposed to find. Meanwhile the tension in the prison was growing. Matthew began to notice strange behavior. A group of prisoners were watching him in the yard, talking in low voices and exchanging furtive glances. Even more disturbing was the behavior of one of the guards, who seemed to be in constant contact with these people. Matthew nodded in disbelief, and he began to wonder if he was truly safe there at night. Footsteps echoed down the hallway and stopped in front of his cell, only to disappear a few moments later. The feeling of being watched made every minute a torture. When the lawyer returned, his worried expression brought no relief. He revealed that the asylum had been destroyed in a mysterious fire years ago, the same one that had left marks on Titan's body. Even worse, old records showed that Titan had been rescued from a property owned by the man behind Matthew's imprisonment. Every discovery felt like a piece of a puzzle that Matthew hadn't even realized he was putting together, but the picture that was beginning to come together was terrifying. Titan, the dog that had been his only source of hope, now seemed to be the key to unraveling a dark secret. Matthew felt the weight of the responsibility he needed to take on to find Titan, not just because the animal meant everything to him, But because something in Titan's scars and his past held the answer that could change everything lying in that cold cell, Matthew knew that time was running out. Connections that had once seemed impossible now seemed inevitable. Everything Titan had seen in the past he was determined to uncover, even if it meant facing something far greater than he had ever imagined. The lawyer returned the next day with a look of intense tension on his face. He brought several old documents, burnt photographs, and, even more disturbingly, a police report of the fire at Matthew's orphanage. It was beyond our expectations, he said as the papers slid across the living room table. Among the notes was a photograph of Titan as he had been before he was rescued, scarred and chain-linked to a rural property, a property that, to Matthew's horror, belonged to John Everett, the very man who had built a case against him. Matthew could feel the shape of CN in his stomach as he read each line, his eyes wide, the words blurring as disturbing truths began to surface. Everett was known for his involvement in shady dealings, including an underground dog fighting ring. Titan wasn't just a survivor of the fire, he was a living witness to the atrocities committed at that place, and now Everett seemed willing to do anything to keep those secrets buried. As he absorbed the information, Matthew began to connect the dots. The fire that had destroyed the shelter hadn't been an accident, it had been a desperate attempt to erase evidence, including the dogs that could have knocked Everett down. Somehow Titan had escaped, but he bore the marks of that terrible past on his body, and Matthew could now understand from his behavior why he had been targeted. He was the one who had unknowingly protected the one witness who could reveal everything that had happened to him that same night. Back in his cell, Matthew felt the weight of the conspiracy around him. The footsteps in the dark now seemed deliberate, and the looks that the prisoners and guards exchanged made it clear that something was about to happen. He didn't know who to trust, but he was sure that time was running out. He needed to get out of there, but first he had to make sure that Titan was safe. If something happens to me, he needs to be protected. He thought about it. The next day, Matthew asked his lawyer to contact an animal rights organization. He knew that Titan could be in danger, especially now that Everett could tell that the dog's secrets were about to come to light. The lawyer hesitated, but agreed when he saw the seriousness in Matthew's eyes. "I'll do it, but you need to hold on. Matthew, don't let them silence you." The man said this before he hurried out of his cell alone. Matthew began to plan his next move. He knew that he couldn't passively wait for justice. Titan's fate and the truth about Everett were intertwined, and he needed to find a way to uncover it. He didn't know that at that very moment, forces were focused on ensuring he would never have that chance. The darkness of the night brought with it an unsettling silence. Lying in his cold cell, Matthew felt something change. It wasn't just the growing tension from his recent discoveries, but the feeling of being watched. He closed his eyes, trying to ignore the discomfort, but the sound of soft footsteps echoing down the hallway made him sit up immediately. Something was happening, and he knew he had to be on guard. The footsteps stopped just outside his cell. Matthew held his breath, trying to listen. Suddenly, a low, firm voice broke the silence. "Carter, we need to talk." It was the guard he recognized from his daily rounds, but there was something different in his tone. The man seemed cautious, as if he was risking a lot by speaking. Matthew stepped closer to the door. Intrigued, "What do you want from me?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even despite his pounding heart. The guard looked around before answering. "There are things going on here that you don't fully understand. There are powerful people involved in this, and you are closer to the truth than you should be." Matthew felt a chill run down his spine. "If you know anything about why you are here, why, tell me now." The guard paused before answering. His expression was tense, "Because I believe you are innocent, and also because they move fast. I don't know how long I can protect you before Matthew has time to ask more questions." The guard slid an envelope under the door. "It was left for you. Be careful next time. I will not be here to help you without saying more." He walked away quickly, disappearing down the hallway before Matthew could thank him or ask him more questions with shaking hands. Matthew took the envelope. Inside was an old photograph and a handwritten note. "The answers are closer than you think. Trust what you know." He held the photograph in the dim light of the cell. It was a photograph of a much younger Titan, chained up in what looked like a farmstead. In the background was a barn with a familiar symbol painted on the tree. Matthew tried to remember where he had seen that symbol, but his mind was foggy. All he knew was that the photograph was another piece of a puzzle that would become increasingly complex in the days that followed. The feeling of being watched grew. Matthew noticed the lingering stares of some of the prisoners, and even other guards he didn't recognize. Who was on his side and who might be working against him? Despite this, the picture in the envelope gave him a new sense of determination. He needed to figure out where that barn was and what the connection was between Titan and the man behind his imprisonment. When the lawyer returned, Matthew shared the picture and the note. "Does this mean anything to you?" he asked, trying to contain his worry. The lawyer studied the image for a moment before shaking his head. "Not right away, but I'll figure it out. That symbol could be an important clue. I'll start by saying." When the lawyer left, Matthew felt a mix of hope and apprehension. He knew time was working against him, but for the first time he felt like the truth was within his reach. The next morning brought a heavier atmosphere to the prison than usual. Matthew could feel the tension building, as if something important was about to happen. As he walked to the cafeteria under constant surveillance by the guards, he noticed more tense looks and murmurs among the other prisoners. It wasn't paranoia, there was a feeling in the air. There was an air of anticipation, and he was right in the middle of it. He knew I should stay calm, but his instincts told him that danger was fast approaching. In the visiting room, the lawyer arrived with a look of deep His instincts told him that danger was fast approaching. In the visiting room, the lawyer arrived with a look of deep concern on his face. He placed some papers on the table, adjusted his glasses, and looked directly at Matthew. "I found the barn in the photograph," he began, his voice even. "It is on property that has been abandoned for years but belongs to a man we know well, John Everett." Matthew felt his blood run cold again. "Of course, what else did you find?" The lawyer's sighed before continuing. "The barn was used as a meeting place for illegal activity, and it looked like Titan had been rescued from there during the operation that almost exposed the truth about Everett's scheme." Matthew closed his eyes for a moment, taking in the words. The weight of what was happening was beginning to weigh on him more and more. "So now how does this help my case?" he asked, trying to remain calm. The lawyer looked at him seriously. "We have to tie the dent's end directly to the case. If we can prove he was there and whatever it was connected to, it could be a turning point. But Matthew, it also means we're dealing with something very dangerous. There are people who don't want this truth to be said." He walked out back to his cell. Matthew was torn between hope and fear. He knew he was getting closer to something big, but he also felt like every step put him at risk. Thinking, he remembered the moments with Titan, their unbreakable bond. There was something in the dog's behavior that always seemed more than instinctive, as if he knew his presence meant more than just companionship. Matthew was determined to protect him at all costs. As the night fell, the feeling of unease grew. Matthew heard footsteps in the hallway again, but this time no one stopped in front of his cell. He looked through the small window in the door and saw the guard exchanging suspicious glances with the prisoner. Something was being planned, and Matthew knew he needed to be prepared. He sat on his bed, his mind spinning the key to everything. There was still Titan, and he needed to uncover the truth before it was too late. As the lawyer continued his investigation, Matthew felt the noose tightening with every discovery, bringing a new level of complexity to the case, but also bringing the truth closer. He didn't know how it would all end, except one thing was clear: he would fight to the end to protect Titan and uncover what really happened. It felt like fate was playing its last cards, and Matthew was about to play his own. The early morning brought with it an uneasy silence broken only by the distant sound of metal doors closing. Matthew lay in his bed. He knew something was moving behind the scenes. He had learned to recognize the signs. The guards' distracted glances, the murmurs among the prisoners, and the way the lawyer seemed more and more under pressure, as if everything was coming to an inevitable moment. Time was running out and he needed to act before it was too late. That morning the lawyer returned with new information that deepened the mystery. "Matthew, we found records of other properties owned by Everett. One of them directly linked to the fire at the shelter where Titan was found. The strangest thing was that these objects were transferred to third parties shortly before his arrest. It was no coincidence." Matthew could feel the anger building inside him. "So not only did he frame me, he was also trying to erase any traces that connect him to these places." The lawyer nodded. "But now we have a problem. We need hard evidence, and from what I found, there is someone who might have answers. Someone who was working for Everett at the time." Matthew listened intently as the lawyer revealed more details. This man was a former trusted employee of Everett's who had disappeared after a fire. He was now living in a small remote town, avoiding contact with anyone who could connect him to the past. If we could talk to him, we might get information that would confirm what we know about Everett's involvement. But it would be risky. he might not want to cooperate, the lawyer explained. Matthew nodded, feeling the weight of the uncertainty. We have no choice if he knows something we need to find out. Meanwhile, the tension was building in the prison. Matthew grew aware that the suspicious footsteps and glances were becoming more frequent. He knew the circle around him was closing. There was something in the air, a feeling that a final attempt to silence him was about to happen, but at the same time he felt an unwavering determination. They might try to stop me, he thought, but I won't give in, not now. The day went on. Matthew mentally prepared himself for what was about to happen. He knew the next few hours would be crucial. The truth was within reach, but it was also surrounded by danger. He thought about Titan, how that dog seemed to carry all the answers with him without even saying a word. You are the key to everything, boy, he muttered under his breath, and I will do everything in my power to protect you and expose the truth. The courtroom was packed that morning. A tense silence hung in the air. Matthew, sitting next to his lawyer, could feel his heart pounding as he waited for the decisive moment to begin. New evidence was laid out on the table, a photo of Titan in at work of illegal activities in the corner of the room. Matthew noticed Titan being brought in by the SPCA, the German Shepherd looking at him with the same devotion she always did, and in that moment Matthew felt a surge of renewed strength. The lawyer began his case, presenting evidence that will change everything. A former employee told how Everett set the fire to hide the evidence and how Matthew was falsely accused. He explained that Titan was one of the few survivors at the crime scene and that his escape put the dog and everyone protecting him at the center of a dangerous conspiracy. Matthew Carter was not only the victim of a frame-up, but he unknowingly risked his life to protect the only living witness to the scheme, the defense attorney said. Revelation left the courtroom in shock as the judge reviewed the evidence. His expression changed to one of indignation and seriousness. He declared the charges against Matthew baseless and ordered a full investigation into Everett's activities. After hearing the judge's words, Matthew felt a wave of relief and emotion he had not felt in years. He looked at Titan, who was wagging his tail as if he knew the battle had been won for the first time. Matthew felt his life and the life of his trusted companion being restored after the hearing as he walked out of the courthouse with Titan. Matthew took a deep breath, feeling the sun on his face again. As a free man he knew there were trials ahead, but he also knew nothing could break his bond with the Titan. We did it, boy, he said, petting the dog. The truth had finally prevailed, and with it came the promise of a new beginning for both of them.